Hello, my name's Robert Dean Steele, and this is your daily Bible class. We're looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan found in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 42. It says, "On one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he said, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?'" Now we know the background. This teacher of law got up there. He had one specific thing that he wanted to do, and that was to test Jesus. He says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" Now Jesus threw it back. I love this. Jesus answered the question with a question. He says, "Well, before I answer your question, what does the law say? How do you read it?" He said, "Well, this is what it says. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself." He says, this is what the law says. You're supposed to love the Lord with every fiber of your being, and that will translate into doing it for others. Jesus says, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you shall live." So this is the background. This is the background. The man wanted to test Jesus. Jesus turns it around. He then replies by giving the correct answer. Jesus says, "You've done this." He says, "You do this and you will live." Now, it says here, but he wanted to justify himself and asked Jesus, "Then who is my neighbor?" A legitimate question. He is a man who is wanting to the first, of course, his motives may not have been pure at the first time, but Jesus was able to bring to him a spiritual truth. He says, "Listen, if you do what you have said you'll do, you know the way, you know what you have to do." And that's how many of us are. We know what to do, and that's where we struggle. That's where the rubber hits the road. James puts it very succinctly when he said this: "If you know what to do is right and you don't do it, it is sin." Now, this man wanted to justify himself. He was probably doing a little bit of deflection. I mean, let's face it, Jesus hit him right between the eyes. He had originally intended to catch Jesus, but Jesus caught him instead. And so he's trying to justify himself, maybe deflect the blame a little bit. And so he says, "So who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus then gives this wonderful illustration. He says, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down the same road." So here's the scenario. This man is traveling down from Jerusalem down to Jericho. Now you have to understand something. There's only 11 miles between Jerusalem and Jericho. And you follow this little path. It's called the Wadi Kelt, and it goes basically down right there. I was actually there. And as you're heading down, now think about this. Jerusalem's up about 2,500 feet above sea level, and Jericho's down about 900 feet below sea level. So in the space of 11 miles, you're dropping down about 3,500 feet. Now that's actually quite a bit. So that's why Jesus said he went down. About halfway there. Now you have to understand, it's very rugged country. It's the Judean wilderness, okay? It's rugged country, full of coulees and full of ravines and little washouts. So lots of places for people to hide, robbers to hide. Did you know, actually, it wasn't until 1934 that they were able to ferret and get rid of all the robbers out of the Judean wilderness? There was lots of places for them to hide. Nowadays, of course, what's going on in the Sinai desert, the Egyptians are trying to capture robbers and terrorists in the Sinai. And the Sinai is very much like that area. So, long story short, they beat him, they stripped him, and they left him half dead. And on the same road, not long after, a priest comes by. And when he saw him, what did he do? He passed on the other side. That's what he did. I mean, this is a moralist. This is a man of God. And he basically forgets about it. Goes on the other side, takes one look, says, hey, I'm not having anything to do with that one. And also a Levite. So you have a priest, someone of the aristocracy, some moral man, and a Levite, another man of God. And he came to that place, and he passed by on the other side. But then, Jesus says, a Samaritan. Now, a Samaritan, as we know from previous discussion, was considered a half-breed, someone who was inferior to the Jews. And that's why Jesus used this as an illustration. He said, listen, the Samaritan was going to do something here. As he traveled, he came to where the man was. He saw him, and he took him, and he took pity on him. He saw the man. Now, why a Samaritan would do this? Most likely because of the fact that he had been cursed. He had been an object of prejudice, and so this probably moved him towards compassion. But Jesus was making a point. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured oil and wine on it. Then he took the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he gave the innkeeper 2 silver coins and said, look after him. And when I return, I will reimburse you with any extra expense which you may have. So there's the scenario. You have a man being beat up and left for dead. A priest comes along, a Levite comes along, and they both pass on the other side. A Samaritan, the hated foe, prejudice foe of the Jews, comes along and aids him and takes care of him, takes him to an inn and takes care of his wounds, and then pays so that he would be taken care of. And he says, and if there's any other expense, he says, I will reimburse you next time I come by. Obviously, he knew the innkeeper. Now, Jesus says, which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor of the man who fell into the hands of the robber? Jesus was using this as an illustration that whenever the opportunity comes, we should be doing good to others. In fact, as Christians and believers of God, that is our moral responsibility. Jesus said this. He said, we're to love the Lord our God with... It was actually the leader, the man who tested him, the scribe, the ruler, who said, basically answered the question. He says, the expert law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. What was happening was very simple. Jesus was giving us a wonderful illustration that you say you love God with every fiber of your being. You say that you have mercy upon others. You want to help your neighbor, then begin to do it in the love of God. You see, we can say that we love people, but until we do something that shows our love, actions speak louder than words, is what Jesus is getting across in this particular parable. He says, you love God? Wonderful. You love him with all your heart? Wonderful. Now do something to someone else in love, acceptance, and forgiveness. You're to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with every fiber of you, and then you learn to love yourself, and in turn, you learn to love others. Acts of charity are done not so that you can get all the credit and all the glory. No, you do it when no one sees you doing it, so the Lord will reward you in secret because you did it in secret. But he'll also reward you in the open because you did it unto him. Go and do likewise. So today, be an encourager. Today, be someone who shows practical love. My name is Robert Dean Steele. This is your daily Bible class. You have yourself a great and godly day.